Most people like to believe they are open to feedback. They say they want honesty, they claim they appreciate constructive criticism, and they often present themselves as people who are willing to grow. In healthy personalities, this is mostly true. When someone hears a critique about their behavior, their first reaction might be discomfort or even a brief moment of defensiveness. But after the initial emotional wave passes, something important happens: reflection. They begin to ask themselves whether there is truth in what they heard. This ability to pause, reconsider, and adjust is one of the foundations of psychological maturity. For a narcissist, however, the experience of criticism is fundamentally different. What might appear from the outside as a simple suggestion or mild feedback is internally perceived as a serious threat. It is not just about a behavior that could be improved. Instead, the narcissist experiences it as if their entire identity has been attacked. Their self-image is built very carefully, almost like a fragile structure that must constantly appear impressive, flawless, and superior. Because this self-image is so rigid and fragile at the same time, any form of criticism feels like someone trying to crack the foundation. This is why their reactions often seem disproportionate. A small comment such as, "Maybe you could have handled that situation differently," may trigger a strong defensive response. Instead of considering the message, the narcissist focuses on protecting the image they have constructed. The conversation quickly shifts away from reflection and toward defense. They may argue aggressively, insist that the other person is wrong, or try to discredit the person giving the feedback. In some cases, they might even rewrite the story entirely, turning themselves into the victim while portraying the critic as unfair or jealous. Another common reaction is blame shifting. If something goes wrong, the narcissist rarely accepts responsibility. Instead, the fault is placed on circumstances, colleagues, partners, or anyone else who can serve as a convenient explanation. This behavior is not always a calculated manipulation. Often it is an automatic psychological defense mechanism. Accepting responsibility would require acknowledging imperfection, and that would threaten the carefully maintained image of superiority. Healthy individuals, by contrast, have a more flexible sense of self. They do not need to believe they are perfect in order to feel worthy. Because their self-worth does not depend entirely on being flawless, they can tolerate moments when they discover they made a mistake. These moments may be uncomfortable, but they are also valuable because they open the door to learning. Growth becomes possible precisely because imperfection is allowed to exist. The narcissist is trapped in a different dynamic. Their sense of self-esteem is unstable and often depends heavily on external validation. Praise, admiration, and recognition act like reinforcement for the identity they want to maintain. Criticism, on the other hand, threatens to take that reinforcement away. As a result, their mind treats criticism almost like an alarm signal. Instead of asking, "Is there something I can learn here?" the internal response becomes, "I must defend myself immediately." This defensive pattern creates a significant barrier to personal development. Growth requires a certain level of self-honesty. It requires the willingness to examine one's own behavior and admit when improvement is needed. Without that ability, mistakes tend to repeat themselves. Conflicts with others remain unresolved because the narcissist cannot acknowledge their role in the problem. Over time, this often leads to strained relationships and a pattern in which the same arguments, disappointments, and misunderstandings occur again and again. People around narcissists frequently experience frustration in these situations. They may try to communicate calmly, hoping that a reasonable conversation will lead to understanding. Yet instead of dialogue, they encounter resistance. The narcissist might interrupt, dismiss the concern, or escalate the situation emotionally. In some cases, they might even accuse the other person of being overly sensitive or unfair. This reaction can leave others feeling confused, because what started as a simple attempt at honest communication suddenly turns into a defensive conflict. At a deeper level, this pattern reveals something important about psychological security. True confidence does not require constant protection. People who are genuinely secure in themselves can hear difficult feedback without feeling destroyed by it. They understand that criticism is not always a rejection of their value as a person. Sometimes it is simply information that helps them become better. The narcissist, however, lives with a constant need to maintain a perfect reflection of themselves. That reflection must remain polished at all times. Criticism threatens to scratch the surface, and even a small scratch feels intolerable. As a result, instead of using feedback as a tool for growth, they treat it as something that must be rejected, fought against, or avoided. This is why honest criticism becomes such a powerful test of character. It reveals whether a person values truth more than image, growth more than pride, and understanding more than ego. Those who can listen, reflect, and adjust demonstrate a resilience that strengthens their relationships and their personal development. Those who cannot remain trapped in a cycle of defense, protecting an illusion that ultimately prevents them from becoming stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. Human relationships are built on a quiet but powerful ability, the capacity to sense what another person might be feeling. This ability, often called empathy, allows people to step outside their own immediate perspective and become curious about the inner world of someone else. It does not mean that we must fully understand every emotion another person experiences, but it means we recognize that their feelings matter. When someone shares pain, disappointment, or fear, empathy invites us to pause and ask a simple question: what might this person be going through right now? For most people, this response emerges almost naturally. When a friend talks about a difficult day, when a colleague seems overwhelmed, or when a family member expresses sadness, something inside us shifts. Attention moves away from our own concerns for a moment. We listen more carefully. Our tone softens. Sometimes we offer advice, but often we simply offer presence. That small moment of emotional recognition can be incredibly powerful because it creates connection. The other person feels seen and understood. For someone with strong narcissistic tendencies, this process often works very differently. Their mental focus tends to revolve primarily around their own experiences, their own needs, and the way they are perceived by others. This does not necessarily mean they are incapable of recognizing emotions altogether. Many narcissistic individuals are actually quite skilled at reading emotional cues when it helps them navigate social situations or maintain their desired image. However, the crucial difference lies in motivation. The recognition of other people's feelings is rarely driven by genuine concern for the other person's well-being. Instead, it is often filtered through a single question: how does this affect me? When someone else expresses distress, the narcissistic mind may quickly evaluate whether the situation has relevance for their own comfort, reputation, or control. If the suffering of the other person demands attention, that might shift focus away from the narcissist. It can feel inconvenient or even irritating. As a result, the emotional needs of others are often minimized or dismissed. A partner who expresses sadness might be told they are overreacting. A friend who seeks understanding might receive impatience instead of support. This pattern becomes especially clear in moments when empathy requires emotional effort without any visible reward. In healthy relationships, people often support one another during difficult times, even when there is nothing to gain from doing so. A person might sit with a grieving friend late at night, listen to a partner's worries after a long day, or offer encouragement to someone who feels insecure. These gestures are rarely dramatic, but they reflect a genuine willingness to share emotional space. For a narcissist, however, such moments can feel uncomfortable. Genuine empathy requires temporarily leaving the center of attention and allowing someone else's emotional reality to take priority. That shift can be difficult because the narcissistic mindset is strongly oriented toward maintaining a sense of personal importance. If another person's pain becomes the focus, the narcissist may feel as though their own position in the emotional landscape is being reduced. Because of this, conversations that should revolve around another person's experience often shift back toward the narcissist. Someone might begin sharing a personal struggle, only to find the discussion gradually redirected. The narcissist might start talking about their own challenges, their own achievements, or their own frustrations. What began as an attempt to express vulnerability becomes overshadowed by the narcissist's need to remain central in the interaction. Another challenge is the difficulty narcissists often have with emotional depth that does not enhance their image. Expressions of vulnerability can be uncomfortable because they highlight aspects of life that cannot easily be controlled or turned into admiration. If a partner is dealing with anxiety or sadness, acknowledging that pain requires patience and humility, the narcissist may instead respond with criticism, impatience, or attempts to quickly fix the problem so that the uncomfortable emotions disappear. Over time, this lack of genuine empathy can create distance in relationships. People naturally seek environments where their feelings are respected and acknowledged. When they repeatedly encounter dismissal or indifference, they may begin to withdraw emotionally. Conversations become more superficial because deeper emotions feel unsafe to share. The relationship may still continue on the surface, but the sense of real connection gradually fades. True empathy, on the other hand, strengthens bonds because it signals that people are valued beyond their usefulness or their ability to provide admiration. It says, in a quiet but meaningful way, "Your experience matters, even when it has nothing to do with me." This kind of emotional recognition builds trust because it shows that the relationship is not based solely on attention or status, but on mutual understanding. The difficulty narcissists face with empathy ultimately reveals something about emotional maturity. To care deeply about another person's feelings requires a stable sense of self. When someone feels secure in their own identity, they can allow attention to move toward others without fearing that their own importance will disappear. They can witness another person's vulnerability without interpreting it as a threat. Without that inner stability, empathy becomes much harder to sustain. Attention remains fixed on maintaining personal importance, and the emotional worlds of others fade into the background. In this way, the absence of empathy is not simply a social inconvenience. It reflects a deeper struggle with connection itself, because meaningful relationships depend on the ability to step beyond the boundaries of one's own perspective and genuinely recognize the humanity of another person. Success is one of the most revealing moments in human relationships. When someone around us achieves something meaningful, it quietly tests the emotional structure within us. A colleague receives recognition for their work, a friend reaches an important milestone, or a family member accomplishes something they have been striving for. In these moments, a healthy personality usually experiences a mixture of admiration and inspiration. There may even be a spark of motivation. If someone close to us can grow, achieve, and move forward, perhaps we can do the same. Their success does not diminish our value. Instead, it expands what feels possible. This reaction reflects a secure sense of self. People who feel internally stable do not experience the achievements of others as a personal threat. They are able to appreciate the effort, discipline, and dedication that often lie behind success. They can congratulate sincerely because they understand that another person's accomplishment does not erase their own strengths. Life is not a single spotlight where only one person is allowed to shine at a time. There is room for many different talents, many different paths, and many different forms of recognition. For someone with strong narcissistic tendencies, however, the emotional landscape of success looks very different. At the center of the narcissistic mindset lies a powerful need to feel superior, exceptional, or at least uniquely important. Their self-worth is often built on comparisons. Instead of evaluating themselves based on personal growth or internal values, they measure their status against the people around them. As long as they appear more impressive, more admired, or more successful than others, their identity feels stable. But the moment someone else achieves something remarkable, a subtle shift occurs. The comparison that once worked in the narcissist's favor suddenly becomes uncomfortable. Another person's success introduces a dangerous possibility. Perhaps someone else is receiving the admiration that the narcissist believes should belong to them. Instead of seeing the accomplishment as a positive event, the narcissist's mind begins to interpret it as competition. This internal shift often leads to reactions that may seem confusing or disappointing to others. Rather than offering genuine congratulations, the narcissist might respond with indifference or faint praise. Sometimes the compliment feels strangely empty, as if it is delivered out of social obligation rather than true appreciation. In other cases, the response becomes more critical. The narcissist may point out flaws in the achievement, question whether it was really deserved, or emphasize how easy the accomplishment must have been. These reactions serve an important psychological purpose for the narcissist. By minimizing another person's success, they protect their own sense of superiority. If the achievement can be framed as insignificant, accidental, or exaggerated, then the narcissist's position at the top of the imagined hierarchy remains intact. It is not necessarily a conscious strategy. Often it happens automatically because acknowledging another person's excellence would force the narcissist to confront an uncomfortable reality: someone else might be equally or even more capable. Another common response is the sudden redirection of attention. When someone shares good news, the conversation may quickly shift back to the narcissist's own experiences. They might begin talking about their own accomplishments, their own challenges, or something impressive they recently did. What began as a celebration of someone else gradually becomes another opportunity for the narcissist to re-establish themselves as the central figure. This pattern reveals an important difference between admiration and insecurity. Genuine admiration requires emotional generosity. It involves recognizing the effort and success of another person without immediately relating it back to oneself. When people admire others openly, they demonstrate a kind of inner abundance. They feel secure enough to appreciate greatness wherever it appears. Insecurity, by contrast, narrows perception. Instead of seeing success as something that can exist in many forms, the insecure mind interprets every achievement as a potential threat. The world becomes a constant competition where recognition is scarce and must be protected at all costs. In such an environment, celebrating another person's success feels almost like surrendering status. Over time, this inability to genuinely celebrate others can damage relationships. Friends and colleagues may begin to notice the pattern. Moments that should bring people closer together instead feel tense or disappointing. When good news is shared, the response lacks warmth or enthusiasm. Gradually, people may stop sharing their achievements altogether, sensing that their success will not be welcomed. Healthy communities, workplaces, and friendships thrive on shared celebration. When people support one another's growth, they create an atmosphere where progress becomes contagious. Success spreads because individuals encourage each other rather than compete for attention. In such environments, admiration strengthens connection instead of threatening it. The narcissist, however, struggles to participate in this kind of shared joy. Their identity depends too heavily on being the most impressive person in the room. Any situation that challenges this position triggers discomfort. Instead of expanding their perspective to include the achievements of others, they try to reduce or overshadow those achievements. At its core, the difficulty lies in a fragile foundation of self-worth. True confidence allows a person to stand beside successful individuals without feeling diminished. It understands that another person's brilliance does not extinguish one's own light. But when identity depends on constant comparison, every shining moment from someone else begins to feel like a shadow. And so rather than celebrating the success that surrounds them, the narcissist often finds themselves quietly fighting against it, protecting an image that becomes harder and harder to maintain. Every human being makes mistakes. It is one of the most ordinary and unavoidable aspects of life. People misjudge situations, speak too quickly, misunderstand others, or make decisions that later turn out to be wrong. In healthy personalities, mistakes are not only accepted as part of the human experience, they are also seen as opportunities to learn. There may be embarrassment, disappointment, or regret, but eventually a reflective process begins. A person looks at what happened and asks themselves what they could do differently next time. At the center of this process lies a simple but powerful ability: the willingness to take responsibility. Taking responsibility does not mean humiliating oneself or carrying endless guilt. It means acknowledging that one's own actions had consequences. Sometimes this acknowledgement is expressed in very small but meaningful words. "I was wrong," or "I should have handled that better." These words often repair relationships because they signal honesty and maturity. They show that a person values truth more than pride. For someone with strong narcissistic tendencies, however, this process can feel extremely threatening. Their identity is often built around the idea of being competent, admirable, and superior to others. Admitting a mistake directly contradicts that image. It introduces a crack into the carefully constructed picture they maintain of themselves. Instead of appearing flawless, they suddenly risk looking ordinary or imperfect. Because this possibility feels so uncomfortable, narcissists often develop strong psychological defenses against it. When something goes wrong, their first reaction is rarely self-reflection. Instead, the mind quickly searches for alternative explanations that protect their self-image. Responsibility is pushed outward rather than inward. Someone else must be at fault, or the situation itself must be blamed. This can appear in many different forms. A narcissist might argue that the instructions they received were unclear, that other people failed to do their part properly, or that the circumstances were unfair. Even when the evidence clearly points toward their own role in the problem, they may reinterpret events in ways that preserve their sense of superiority. The mistake becomes someone else's misunderstanding rather than their own error. Another common pattern is rationalization. Instead of acknowledging that a decision was wrong, the narcissist may create explanations that make the action seem reasonable or even necessary. They might claim that their behavior was justified because they were under pressure, because others forced their hand, or because they had no better options at the time. These explanations serve as psychological shields that prevent the uncomfortable experience of admitting fault. In some situations, the defense becomes even more complex. The narcissist may attempt to reverse the roles entirely, presenting themselves as the true victim of the situation. The conversation shifts away from the original mistake and toward how unfairly they are being treated for being questioned. This redirection can confuse others because it transforms a simple discussion about responsibility into an emotional conflict about blame and injustice. For people interacting with a narcissist, this pattern can be deeply frustrating. They may approach a conversation hoping to resolve a problem, only to find that the discussion never reaches the point of acknowledgement. Instead of hearing, "I understand what I did wrong," they encounter defensiveness, denial, or counter-accusations. Over time, this makes genuine problem-solving almost impossible, because every mistake becomes a battle over reputation, rather than an opportunity for improvement. Healthy accountability works very differently. When individuals are capable of admitting their mistakes, conflicts often become easier to resolve. Acknowledgement creates space for trust because it demonstrates honesty. It tells others that the person is willing to examine their own behavior rather than constantly protecting their ego. This openness often strengthens relationships, even after difficult situations. Accountability also plays a crucial role in personal growth. Learning requires feedback, and feedback often includes recognizing where things went wrong. When people allow themselves to examine their errors honestly, they gain valuable insight into their own patterns. They become more aware of how their actions affect others, and they develop the ability to adjust their behavior in the future. For narcissists, avoiding responsibility blocks this entire learning process. If every mistake must be denied, minimized, or blamed on someone else, there is little room left for reflection. The same problems tend to repeat themselves because the underlying behavior is never truly examined. From the outside, it may seem as though the narcissist is constantly surrounded by conflicts, misunderstandings, or unfair situations. Yet the common factor linking these situations often remains unacknowledged. At a deeper level, the difficulty with accountability reveals something about the fragility of the narcissistic self-image. True confidence allows a person to accept imperfection without feeling destroyed by it. Someone who feels secure in their worth understands that making a mistake does not erase their value. It simply means they are human. The narcissist, however, often experiences imperfection as a threat to their entire identity. If they admit one mistake, it feels as though the door has been opened to doubt their competence altogether. To prevent that possibility, they defend their image at all costs, even when the truth becomes obvious to everyone around them. In the end, accountability is not merely about admitting fault. It is about the courage to face reality as it is, rather than as we wish it to appear. People who develop this courage gain something valuable, the freedom to grow beyond their mistakes. Those who cannot accept responsibility remain trapped in a cycle of defense, constantly protecting an image that becomes more fragile with every situation that challenges it. In many ways, modern life constantly encourages people to seek attention. Social recognition, praise, and admiration have become visible currencies in everyday interactions. When someone accomplishes something impressive, it is natural for others to notice and respond with appreciation. Healthy individuals enjoy these moments of recognition, but their sense of identity does not depend entirely on them. If attention fades for a while, nothing essential inside them collapses. They continue with their work, their relationships, and their lives without feeling that their value has disappeared. For someone with strong narcissistic tendencies, attention functions very differently. It is not simply pleasant or encouraging, it becomes a central source of emotional stability. Admiration from others helps maintain the image they hold about themselves, an image of being exceptional, important, and worthy of constant recognition. As long as people are watching, praising, or reacting, that image feels secure. The environment continuously reflects back the identity the narcissist wants to believe in. However, life is not designed to provide constant applause. There are quiet moments when people are busy with their own concerns, when conversations move in different directions, or when no one is offering admiration. For most people, these moments pass without much thought. Silence simply means that attention has shifted somewhere else for a while. For a narcissist, silence can feel very uncomfortable. Without external reinforcement, the carefully maintained sense of importance begins to weaken. The absence of attention creates a subtle anxiety, almost like standing on a stage after the lights have gone out. The applause has stopped, the audience has turned away, and suddenly the narcissist is left alone with their own thoughts. This situation exposes a deeper dependency. Many narcissists rely on what psychologists sometimes describe as narcissistic supply, meaning the steady flow of attention, admiration, validation, or even emotional reactions from others. These reactions act like fuel for their self-image. Without them, the feeling of superiority or uniqueness becomes harder to sustain. Because of this dependency, narcissists often react strongly when attention begins to fade. One common response is the creation of drama. Conflicts may suddenly appear where none existed before. Minor disagreements become exaggerated, and emotional intensity rises quickly.